Xivaari by Rigel Ailur. I refused to let him die. Ignoring the jungle around us, we sat nose to nose and glowered at each other. Well, I was sitting on my haunches. My feline friend, Fleetfoot, was reclining, his head resting on his paws, which put our eyes just about at the same level. He growled deep in his throat and blinked his pale blue eyes a few times. Then he lifted his head and let out a full-blown roar that made my very bones tremble. It took all my effort not to slam my hands over my ears. Still I persisted. "I know it hurts, but you have to let me clean the wound. Then it will feel better." Fleetfoot didn't understand the words. I knew that. Our communication didn't have a linguistic aspect to it. It was more like sensing each other's moods and intentions. I knew I had to persuade him. The gash wasn't healing. If the wound didn't get tended to, Fleetfoot would die. He had to let me help him. He had to let me, because unless the pure white cat allowed it, a person simply did not do anything to a 2,000-pound bearded feline who stood almost 6 feet high at the shoulder. He snarled again, but half-heartedly. I could tell he was beginning to relent. A moment later he confirmed my assessment by rolling onto his side and exposing the slashed back leg that had been injured when the pack of wolf-like Debors had attacked. In the back of my mind I'd felt sorry for them. They had to have been desperate indeed to go after a Xivaar as prey. But that hadn't stopped me from driving my spear through one of them. Another had latched onto Fleetfoot's back leg until the cat snapped the Debor's neck with one crunch of his huge teeth. I gave an immense sigh of relief and rolled up the sleeves of my fleecy woolen pullover, the same pale beige as my heavy trousers. Then I tied back my long blonde hair to keep a stray strand from falling in my face. I'd already gathered the appropriate herbs and made a poultice in the ceramic bowl I carried with me. I smeared the blue paste in and around the torn flesh, all the while talking soothingly and telling Fleetfoot he would be fine. At one point, when I was working the medicine into the open cut, he gave a sharp snarl yelp of pain and, without getting up, whipped the top half of his body around, jaws snapping just shy of my arm. I froze and continued to radiate what I hoped was reassurance. He gave a whimper, a heartbreaking sound from such a behemoth, and I could see his whole body gradually relax. When I was positive he allowed it and would not bite me in half, I finished dressing the wound and wrapped a bandage around it. Now all we could do was wait, and with him injured, I'd have to be the one to stay on guard. About the only good thing that came from the attack was that Fleetfoot had eaten the 2 dead Debors after we'd driven away the rest. I kept 2 fires going to ensure they didn't return. Vigilant of the surrounding jungle, I sat leaning up against Fleetfoot. Sometimes I talked to him, sometimes I sang. I sensed a ripple of contentment from him as the pain in his leg began to abate. A few times I stood up to circle our small clearing. Every hour or so, I got him water from the nearby stream. As night gave way to dawn, I stayed on my feet just to avoid falling asleep. Sometimes I drove the point of my spear into the soft ground and would lean on it, closing my eyes for just a few minutes. The rest of the Debor pack remained. We hadn't left their territory yet. I'd heard their howls all night. And they were by no means the only predators in the rainforest. The sun rose over the treetops, lightening the deep shadows, but not assuaging my weariness at all. I wanted nothing more than to lie down and slumber for days, but I knew I couldn't. If I did that, we could both be eaten. So I tended the fires and talked to Fleetfoot, who was sleeping, quite blissfully, I noted with jealousy, that instantly shamed me. I blamed it on the exhaustion. Just shy of evening, Fleetfoot stirred. He gave a massive yawn and a huge stretch, as only a cat can, from the ends of his whiskers to the tip of his 8-foot-long white tail. Then he got gracefully to his feet. He stood a moment, ears pricked and tail swishing back and forth. He raised his head, sniffing intently. Then those gorgeous ice-blue eyes of his met my gray ones, and even on the verge of passing out, I felt a rush of joy from him that meant most of the pain in his leg was gone. He nudged me with his forehead, and I could sense he wanted to leave. "Are you sure?" He nudged again, nearly knocking me over. His way of saying yes, he was quite sure. I carefully put out the fires and made sure all my belongings were packed in the 2 sacks. After ensuring my knives were at my waist, I strapped my spear to my back. Lastly, I checked his injury. Already I could see the angry color was gone, and it no longer smelled like rotting meat. "All right," I told him. "I'll take you at your word." Of course, sore or not, he'd likely barely registered the weight on his back, all 120 pounds of me, with the sacks adding 40 more. Fleetfoot knelt, and I slung the bags over his shoulders, then climbed on myself. I could feel the power in him as he got to his feet in one smooth motion. Then, after casting a look my way, he raised his head and roared. The sound echoed across the land and back. Yes, Fleetfoot definitely was feeling much better. I knew he'd make a full recovery. We could get back to our wanderings, now and for many decades to come.